answer that they arrived at was the 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 larger the volume, the amount of work that they actually produced, the higher chances that they actually had a success, a spike in it. So it's sort of directly correlated with that, right? And it kind of makes sense when you think about it from the point of view of like when you're making art, sometimes things don't work and you have to try a bunch of things. It's kind of like the startup methodology. Throw stuff against a wall and see what sticks. Split testing. It's like live split testing, but with the work that you produce. Like Beeple, right? The everyday artwork guy, which I actually don't recommend for 3D artists, especially if you're a beginner. But, he's produced so many that like, he's got so many hits now, right, that could actually look really good on a printed piece. Some that obviously wouldn't look good, but of course, one videos, split testing. It's like live split testing, but with the work that you produce. Like Beeple, right, the everyday artwork guy, which I actually don't recommend for 3D artists, especially if you're a beginner. But he's produced so many that like, he's got so many hits now, right, that could actually look really good on a printed piece. Some that obviously wouldn't look good, but of course, one every day for 10 odd years or whatever it is, you would be surprised if there wouldn't be some stinkers in there. Anyways, now, and Ira Glass, he did a quote which I mentioned, like the most important thing to do when you're trying to get into skill is to get through a volume of work. Now, I agree with all that, and I think this is important to remember, that perfectionism can hold you back. Striving to be better than your last piece, we should all do that. But perfectionism itself, obsessing over details, can throw you off. The problem with this, and the point that I think is not necessarily applicable to beginners, is that it can cause a habit of mindlessly powering through artwork, almost as a, what would you call it? Like trying to hit a quota, right? Like some professors would tell their art students, like, there's 10,000 bad drawings in you. So how quickly are you going to get through those 10,000 drawings? Now, I understand why they would say that, and I agree with it. There are 10,000, maybe even more. However, if you follow that to a T, it can lead to a habit of not thinking about what you're doing and just thinking like, I just got to get through this. I got to get through this. So I was looking at some of my previous artwork over the last 18 months, and I realized I had that in the back of my mind of just powering through. And it was not conscious, which is actually point 4, which we'll get to, conscious learning. So I think it is a good skill. I think it's definitely like, once you know the air, and that's the other crucial thing, like, the reason an expert, like that's a good thing for experts, is that they know which areas will actually lead to the perfection. As a beginner, you end up adding details and like, fiddling with the topology of a model, or like I was looking at some of my sketches from like last year, and it was like I'm putting like detail in like the hairs or the back of the ear, and like, you don't need that, right? Your eyes are focused on the eyes generally of a portrait, and adding detail can actually distract you from the other points. So you might think you're perfecting a piece, you might actually be making it worse because you don't understand what it is. So anyways, that's I would say it's good, but not necessarily for beginners. I think point 4, conscious learning, is important. Okay, number 3, steal. Now this is one that I would say a hard no, I think, for beginners. So I talk about stealing and how every artist that we think is this great genius person isn't really, right? Like, they generally have copied from artists that came before them. We sort of imagine that that I don't know, that they're geniuses and that they just come up with original ideas themselves. But that's not true. There's a great series on Vimeo, by the way, called Everything is a Remix. You should watch that if this is a new concept to you. There's another book, Steal Like an Artist. That's another great book that talks about just the extent at which great artists in history take from those who came before it, and why there's no other alternative, because the idea of coming up with an original idea that hasn't been thought of before is kind of impossible, right? At first I heard that, I'm like, that can't be true. What do you mean you can't have an original thought? I'm going to think of something original right now. But like, yeah, you might have an original of like those particular things, but it's like, it's been done, like things like that have been done before. And the chances of somebody looking at something that you just thought and like squinted your eyes at and and then came out with something and going, wow, that's original. Pretty slim, I would say. The way that it's done, and the way, like, there's a quote by Gary Painter, which I actually mentioned in the talk, who said that if you steal from one person, people will say, oh, you're the next whoever. But if you steal from 10 people, they'll say, wow, you're so original, right? And that's the key point. Conan O'Brien said that he wanted to be like the late night host that came before him, I think Jay Leno. Jay Leno said he wanted to be, I can't remember one of the early late night TV show hosts. Like, they all had people they admired and they wanted to be like, but it was through their failure to copy someone that they actually found their true self and their true voice. So that's kind of how that works. What was I talking about with the multiple pieces? Yeah, I think that's also a key point. If you shouldn't steal from one person, you should steal from multiple people. I think that is the kind of the key ingredient there. You don't copy someone's exact trace over their drawing, because that is a copy. That's wrong. Stealing, however, stealing ideas and combining them into something new, taking the style from this person, the way they shade, the exaggeration, the shape language, bringing it all together into something weird and new. People go like, whoa, that's cool, right? Because it hasn't been done before, right? Or has it? So anyways, steel is important. However, now this is the reason I don't think it is good for beginners, is that at the start you need to know the fundamentals. When I look at my old presentation from 2016, I looked at the works that I did. I was doing stylization that I didn't understand, and I think I wasted a lot of time doing that. I was doing a sort of cartoony, like big eyes, and I was taking a style that I'd seen other people do and I was bringing it in there. I didn't know what the original looked like. And that's important. Like, people wonder, like, why do you need to know photorealism? Why are you harping on photorealism so much, Andrew? Like, in all my tutorials, it's always photorealism based. And that's because at the start, everyone needs to know it. To give a more example, about a year ago, I got into caricatures. And I started because I was trying to do, like, hyper-real sketches of faces, and I realized that, like, even moving something like a millimeter off, like if the nose is a millimeter too high or low, it doesn't look like the person anymore. And I thought, well, I got to learn likeness. Like, what is it that makes somebody looks like themselves? And so I got into caricatures, which is all about like extreme exaggeration of the features that are unique to that person. So if they've got a forehead that's slightly larger than the average forehead, then that's the part you exaggerate. But you also have to subtract another area in order to exaggerate something else. It's a very unique skill, and I failed at it hard. Like, I remember drawing Leonardo DiCaprio and Kanye West, each of them maybe 50 times, right, trying to get a likeness. And I failed. I couldn't figure it out. I'm like, what makes Kanye West look like Kanye West? I figured it was like the jowls, something to do with, he's got big cheeks for some reason. I'm like, but it still didn't look like it. I couldn't figure it out. And I can't remember what it was that triggered me to go back to realistic drawings. But I'm glad I did, because then I spent like another year-ish on photoreal drawings. And then looking back at the caricatures, I'm like, what on earth was I doing? I didn't understand what the original form looked like. I didn't know what the average face looked like, so that I could tell when there was a deviation from that. Like, when I looked at some of the old characters, I'm like, why did I make the chin big? They don't have a big chin. They have a big nose, right? Like, I couldn't figure. So what was I? What is this even point about? It's about stealing, right? So exaggeration and style and all that kind of stuff. It's fun. It's attractive. Every artist wants to have a style of their own, and stealing is a big part of that. And, you know, copying from people that you love. But at the beginner stage, you just need to learn the fundamentals. You need to know what life looks like. I know it's boring. It doesn't have to be boring, by the way. You can find nice photos and create those, and it will be enjoyable when you start cracking through these lessons and figuring out, like, oh, that's what makes that thing look like that. It will be. It's not as boring as it sounds. Like, I know it. Yeah, fundamentals are kind of boring, but the alternative is to do what I've done painfully and to just go through and, like, no, I'm going to do the fun stuff, caricatures, and then 6 months later look back and go like, that was kind of a wasted time. Almost, right? I don't have a drink. Let me get my drink bottle. I need a drink. There. How do you stay motivated, inspired, encouraged when it feels like everyone else is so much better than me? Hmm. How do you stay motivated to keep practicing sculpting in my case when days go by and I'm unhappy with the results? How to keep up with making art when feeling burned out or bored of it. You get the picture. These are the top questions that I was asked on Twitter when I asked, I'm doing a video on art habits, improving. What questions do you have for me? And it became very clear to me that a lot of you are struggling with motivation, or lack of motivation, I should say. And it makes perfect sense. I'm really not surprised at all. I mean, if you were to look at like a pool of 1,000 people who started learning art and they wanted to get good at art and then tracked it like 10 years into the future, where there's like maybe 2 or 3 of those people remaining, and then you went back and surveyed the 997 people who quit and asked them why, I'm sure that most of them would say it was because I just couldn't stay motivated. I couldn't learn. It was difficult. It was a struggle. It was painful. I didn't know what was going wrong. It's a mental game. It's not like this motivation question isn't something that is like good to know. Like, oh, I got to learn my art skills and technical stuff. It's also good to know about motivation. At the start, it is the most important thing. Especially if you are self-learning at home. If you're in a classroom where you have a curriculum and you've got 3 years ahead of you and you've got students around you that are also failing, and you're drawing and you whatever, and you look over and you go, oh wow, they also suck just like me. It can feel good, right? Or at least it feels better than sitting and suffering in silence by yourself at home. But when you're self-learning, it is the most important thing. Like they say, if you listen to any of those motivational gurus or whatever, like if you want to lose weight, right? The first thing you should do is just focus on developing the habit of going to the gym. And it's going to the gym and enjoying it so that you keep going back again and again and again. That is the only focus at the front. In fact, they actually say you should start by saying, like, if you can't go to the gym, you want to, but you just can't bring yourself to do it. They say force yourself to go to the gym for a week for 2 minutes each day. Right? And you go, 2 minutes? It's like, yeah, 2 minutes. That's all you have to do. Get out of your car, go to the gym, clock in, clock out, come back home. If you can develop that, it'll feel painful because you're like, well, I'm going all the way there. I might as well work out. But like, no, just focus on that. You will develop a habit of like, yeah, this isn't so bad. Like putting on the clothing, getting the gym bag, getting the water, getting the phone, everything that I need to get to the gym, driving down there, going in. It's not so bad. I can do that. It's when you try to punish yourself by going like, I'm gonna start working out today, and you go down there for 3 hours and you push weight that you've never pushed before. You burn yourself way out, and then the next morning you go, my muscles are so sore. I cannot do that again, right? And then you just end up not developing the habit. So, and then you end up fat and you can't, not hitting your fitness goals, etc., and you end up quitting, right? So the exact same thing is true with art. You want to start, you want to focus at the start on just trying to enjoy it, and you'll learn some techniques and things along the way, but don't go in too deep. It's tempting, like you're motivated, like, yes, let's do it, I'm gonna go in hard. That is a big problem because you will end up wiping yourself out like the person laying in bed, not wanting to work out. So, anyways, motivation, I hear you, and you're not alone. A lot of people struggle with it. Every artist, I'm sure, struggles with it. I know that I personally have. I've talked about it before in my last episode of the podcast, talked about it in my Habits of Effective Artwork. I deliberately wanted to learn 2D art, one, because I wanted to learn that skill, but also because I think it's good to just go back to something that I don't know, because I teach 3D and like the methodology of 3D and how to learn it and everything. It's hard to remember what it's like to start learning a new skill, and that was very eye-opening to me because, yeah, motivation was the biggest thing that was like an alarm bell to me. It was like the crushing despair of failure was what sucked, right? So anyways, in this video, I'm going to give you 5 ways to stay motivated while failing to learn art. I say that as a joke, failing to learn art. Learning art, but let's be honest, you're setting yourself up for failure, right? You have to fail to get good at something. You have to fail. So how do you stay motivated through that? But to the people, to those questions, the burnout questions, I'm feeling depressed, I feel like I can't get anywhere, I feel like blah, 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 blah. Something that you could do just to start with is the same thing that you would do if you went to a psychologist, a good psychologist, or a psychiatrist. I can never get those two terms right. I don't know which one's which. But if you went to one of those psychologists, sat in a chair and said, I'm depressed, a good psychologist would not go, here's some pills. A lot of them would, obviously, but a good one would not say that. They would say, you're feeling depressed. Tell me more. And he'd get out his little notepad. And they go, well, I'm feeling at work. I'm just like, I don't know, I'm just like not getting anywhere. Like no one seems to like me. And then like the stress of like being at home with the kids and the wife, and there's a lot of stuff going on. I feel like I just can't relax. And you go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper in it. And then eventually you find out like the problem is like you're not getting enough sleep, right? And so you're like over caffeinated. And because of that, you're jittery and you're anxious, and that feeds off onto other people and blah, blah, blah. And the reason you're over caffeinated and you're not getting enough sleep is because you're drinking alcohol before bed. And so the solution isn't medicine, it's to stop the alcohol, because that is the root of the problem that causes everything else. And then maybe the reason you drank alcohol was because of something else, right? Wanted to relax when there's other ways you could do it healthy. Blah, blah, blah. Anyways, point is, root cause of the problem. So I can't do that with you, but you can do it with yourself. Often asking yourself questions is just as effective as going to a professional to get them to ask the why question. So I think they call it the 3 whys, right? If you feel stuck, if you feel like you're not getting anywhere, ask yourself 3 whys. So I'm feeling burned out, and I'm feeling burned out learning art. Why? Well, it feels like I'm not getting anywhere. Why? Well, when I look online, I can see everybody else is doing great, and I feel like my art isn't improving. Why? Well, that's annoying. 3 whys in a row. But you get the point. You end up getting to more of a what might be the root cause of the problem. Because who knows? I mean, if you don't have energy and motivation to do anything, not just art, but even like clean up the house, or I don't know, do things you know you need to do. I mean, it might not be just an art thing. It might be a depression thing. It might be something that you need professional help with. Who knows? I'm going to assume, for the sake of this video, this podcast, that you're all pretty well off. Like you're fine. Your life is going okay. It's just the art thing that needs help with. So, 5 ways. Let's get into it. Number 1, reduce the difficulty. So I'll start with a little anecdote, little story. You know how everyone is like nostalgic for the old arcade games, like the old video games, the 80s and 90s? Like I figured there must be something special about them because I'd never played them. And then a couple of years ago, I got a chance to play them, right? It was actually at SIGGRAPH, the 3D conference in LA. And one of the after parties, because there's all these after parties at SIGGRAPH, was it was hosted at an arcade bar. So it was like I guess it was an LA thing, but it was like a bar with a free arcade, and it was just like all these old games from the 80s and 90s that they put there, and all the games were free. You just had to buy drinks and whatever. It was a cool concept. It was fun to go out and talk to people, but I was like excited because I'm like, oh my goodness, like it's the Donkey Kong game. I've never played Donkey Kong. Let's give it a shot. And you hit the go button, and your character goes and it would like hit an enemy or something like that, and you go, what? And you go and you go, hang on, what am I even doing? And game over. And I was like, huh? I'm like, all right, maybe it was just one game. Go to the next game. Same thing. Every single game was so punishingly hard, like unnecessarily punishing. It really blew my mind, because that's the opposite of today. If you open up, just download any game from the iOS Apple Store, they figured it out. Like, graphics have evolved over the years, that's obvious, but also the game user experience has improved, and I don't think it gets nearly enough attention. It starts, if you start out any game on your iPhone, it'll go, you'll see like a character running, and then it'll go like, this is you, and you're like, oh, this is me. And then it goes like, swipe up to jump over the log, and you swipe up, and he goes, whoop, and then it goes, great job. And it goes, swipe left to avoid the obstacle, and you swipe left, and then it goes, great job. And then it goes like, these are the apples that give you the power, collect the apple, whoop, and then it goes like, click here to put the thing, and you do the thing. And then within like a few steps, you've figured out the whole mechanics of the game, and then it's fun. And I actually read a book on it. It was like gamification. There was a couple of books on gamification and game design, because like, I don't know, 7-ish years ago I was going to build like a gamification thing to the Blender Guru website. I thought that might be fun, so I was reading all these books on it. Never went with that idea, but it was actually really interesting learning that I've applied to learning actually today. Basically, the best games find a delicate balance between I'm bored, this is too easy, and I hate this, this is too hard. And there's a sliver between those. If that was a graph, there's a tiny sliver where it's fun, right? It's just challenging enough that it's not too easy, but it's not so challenging that you want to quit. And it's finding that perfect middle spot that games, like, they iterate over years and years and years of user testing before they end up at this final thing. They do so much data analysis on where people quit in games, and then they go, that there must be something about that level, that experience that makes people want to quit. Let's move it back. Let's make that level 50 instead of level 35 or whatever it is. Apparently Angry Birds is very good at this. The original one, I don't know how many 35 spin-offs or whatever they've got at the moment, but what was the other one? Plants vs. Zombies, that's another one that was like an example on gamification. But anyways, the whole reason I'm telling you this is that point number one is reduce the difficulty. When you are starting out, just like a video game, you do not want to start with the boss level before you've done the tutorial level. This is above all else when people tell me they're demotivated, or I don't know, I'm stuck, I don't know what's going on. They've started with something that is simply too hard. Now, for a while, I didn't understand why that was a problem. Like, when I was learning 2D drawing and like sculpting, learning sculpting in Blender recently, because I'm not really good at that, but I wanted to learn to make faces, so I started sculpting faces. Guess what? Really hard. So ridiculously hard. Same with drawing. I wanted to get good at drawing. I started drawing faces. That is the hardest thing to draw. And I kind of knew that, right? Yeah, I'm an artist, been doing this a few years. I know they talk about the uncanny valley and how we are the most familiar with faces. We've like, biologically, we're wired to know when, you know, a face looks off or wrong or something's not right about it. So we're going to notice subtle imperfections there, but we're not going to notice, you know, subtle changes in like a shark, right? Nobody knows really what sharks look like. You could put the fin in the total wrong area and your eye's probably not going to notice. So it's better off to start drawing a shark than it is to draw a human face. But I thought, I want to get good at human faces, so why not start there? Like, I have to get there eventually, right? I mean, what's the problem in starting to learn through the face problem and figure that out as I'm learning drawing? The problem is motivation, right? You can fail once, you can fail twice, you can fail 3 times, and you can kind of shrug it off, right? Like, you know, I'm learning, right? Do another face. Yeah, I'm learning. Try and do that as I did for like 18 months. It really wears you down. Really. If I didn't have the daily habit thing that I talked about in the last episode of this, I couldn't have done it. It is so punishing. You can do a few failures, right? Don't get me wrong. It's, yeah, challenge is challenge. And I'm not saying if you're trying to sculpt a face and you're sculpting now and you should stop, like, well, yeah, I mean, maybe you should. But what's I going with this? The point is that because motivation is the most important thing, you will probably inevitably quit, or you'll have a break, a long pause, if you start doing things that are way too hard. Like if you wanted to be a figure skater, right? Like, I'm a young teenager, I'm gonna be a figure skater because I've seen them on TV and it looks like a fun thing to do. You've never really hit the ice before, but you go like, I'm gonna start by trying to do the quadruple spin leap in the air that they do in the Olympics, right? The thing that It's like one of the hardest jumps or whatever, right? I'm going to start doing that because after all, I have to get there eventually. That's what I want to do. So why don't I start with that first? That would be insane. Nobody would say that that would succeed, right? And maybe one person could, right? Just going out onto the ice every day and trying, falling down, smashing their chin into the ice, trying again, breaking an arm, coming back, trying again, and just doing that repeatedly. There's a chance you might get it, but there'll be millions who would have failed before you from that method, right? I think the exact same thing is true for a lot of people. They are trying to do things that are just really, really hard. Here's a few things that are really hard to do for 3D, because I know a lot of you watching this are in 3D art, right? Animals, right? Cats, dogs, something about the eyes, very hard. Too many creepy cats and dog models out there. The fur as well. Fur is a really hard one to get right. Obviously, characters, as I've mentioned, realistic faces. If you wanted to go down the face route, start with like an orc or something with like pointy ears or something unnatural. There's a reason a lot of artists start with that. It's not necessarily that they all like Warhammer and Lord of the Rings. It's also because it enables, it gives you the sense that you're making the thing you want to make, which is a face, but it's not so punishing that it's a realistic face. It's something that your mind sees as fantasy and therefore is forgiving when the nose isn't in the right place, etc., etc. So that as you learn more and more, you can eventually get to a realistic face, if you get what I'm saying. Anyways, so this is something that, yeah, I mean, I've really only just learned that when you're starting out, you want to put things on like a scale, right? Inanimate objects are generally a lot easier than animate objects. So, yeah, I mean, I talked about this in the last episode, but one of the best things you can do is like find a photo of something and try and replicate that photo and then put the photo over the top of your render or your painting or whatever it is at the end and see where it's off, because the proportions might be off, the texture might be off, the lighting might be off, anything else might be off, and you don't need like an expert's opinion to tell you that something's off. You can just get that from a photo. So inanimate objects like that are really recommended when you're just starting out. So anyways, that is point number one, which is reduce the difficulty. Number two, second way to stay motivated.